Good morning, everyone. We apologize heartily for the delay. What would a technical broadcast be without some technical issues? We're very happy to have you here in the Swedish pavilion this morning. We will start off straight away with the exciting topic of opportunities and challenges when it comes to managing scope 3 emissions in the supply chain. Without further ado, given the delay, I would like to welcome our speakers to this panel. So first and foremost, I would like to welcome Anna Celsing, the Chief Sustainability Officer at Alfa Laval. Thank you. And then we have Kristian Rönn, the CEO and co-founder of Normative. And then joining us by link, Jonas Otterheim, the Head of Climate Action at Volvo Cars. So we will jump straight into this while waiting for Jonas' video. And I think we will start with you, Anna. So when we talk about scope 3 emissions, it is of course characterized by many challenges. And this is something that you're working with on a daily basis. Yes. Can you elaborate a bit on the major challenges that you, from Alfa Laval's perspective, think is key when speaking about scope 3 emissions?
Yes, I'd love to. And is the microphone working? Yes, now it is. Thank you. Great to be here. It is very much a topic that we work daily on. And I would say that the main thing is that to both collect the data in our supply chain from all our suppliers and customers, because we look at both our supply chain and our customer sides, the user face. But most of all, it is how do we really actually bring down the scopes when it's out of or much further from our impact. It could be that we need to optimize our processes at the customer sites. We need to look into and find ways to find the fossil-free steels or metals that we're using very much in our equipment. So that it's really a lot about impacting where we not have really the impact. And we need to do that with partnerships, and we need to have the data to know what to focus on, because it's huge. 98% of our footprint is within the scope 3.
Thank you, Anna, very much. Moving over to you, Jonas, representing another very large OEM, namely Volvo Cars. Do you agree with Anna here? What are your perspectives when it comes to the key challenges of working with scope 3 emissions?
Yes, thank you. I very much agree with what Anna said. At Volvo Cars, out of our total emissions, 99% is also scope 3, similar to what Anna just mentioned. So the importance of understanding that those emissions and ensuring that we can act on them to reduce them, that is critical for us. And similar to what Anna mentioned, having actionable data and insights of those emissions, not only from our tier 1 suppliers, but all the way down to the absolute raw material mine, that is, well, a very big challenge, but very important. Because, well, in the end of the day, to reach climate neutrality in the full value chain, we need to get there, even though we have plenty of challenges right now.
Excellent. Thank you, Jonas, very much. Moving over to you, Kristian, you represent a company that actually help other companies to measure their scope 3 emissions. So you have insight into many different companies and the challenges they face within this domain. Can you elaborate a bit on what are your perspectives of the challenges with the scope 3 discussion?
Yes, absolutely. And before I do, I just want to take a step back and just briefly mention why scope 3 is important and why the value chain is important. And I think what you said encapsulates it perfectly well. I mean, like 98% and 99% of emissions. So this idea that you have responsibility within your value chain is extremely powerful in terms of the climate impact. And we talked about this yesterday, that we have a look at 1,000 companies with net zero commitments, and those 1,000 companies combined have a scope 3 emission of around 80% of the world's global emissions. So this idea to take responsibility in the value chain like you are doing is just immensely powerful. If all companies do that, then I think we can reach net zero together. Then on the question around the challenges, the biggest challenge is that, scope 3 is by definition not within your own operation. It is in your value chain. So it's harder to control, and it's hard to get data in terms of, do I have the right actionable insights where I know what suppliers to work with and how to work with them in terms of, reducing the emissions. It's not as easy as just, switching electricity provider within your own operations. And we have seen this from, working with the clients like Hitachi Rail and Hertz and SCB and plenty of global enterprises that actionable insights are key.
Add one perspective also in that. I think it's very important that we also, it sounds or strange maybe, but focus on scope 1 and 2, because our scope 1 and 2 is our customers. So by doing our job to really bring down scope 1 and 2, where we really have an impact and can take responsibility and do very much now, we also have big impact on others. And I think that's not to be forgotten.
Very interesting. And continuing with you, Anna,
yes.
When we talk about the challenge of data collection, can you tell us a bit more how you at Alfa Laval are trying to tackle this obvious challenge with data collection outside your own operation?
Yes, I think it starts very often with close partnerships. When we partner up with our suppliers or with customers, that makes it a lot easier. And we need to, and we try to figure out what is the actual data quality that we need. It could be that you try to go for very specific high quality data, and of course we do in the long run, but what's good enough and how can we get there? But we have a big challenge of automating the collection, because now we actually have to send questionnaires, for example, to our suppliers, and that's a big hassle for everybody to then reply to us, just like we have to reply to all of our customers. So there's a huge need for everyone, I think, to make this a lot more efficient.
Great. And from your perspective, Jonas, talking about actually working with scope 3 emissions, I know that you are a very outspoken supporter of that. It also comes down to the boring stuff, namely how you organize yourself internally and how you create incentives to actually work with scope 3. Can you tell us a bit more how you are working with this at Volvo Cars?
Yes, I would gladly do so, and I agree. It might be the boring stuff, but it is very important. One learning we have had to start off with that topic is, even though we set ambitious targets, we have, for example, said that we are going to be fully climate neutral by 2040, and we have a number of short-term targets and mid-term targets to ensure we get there. Those targets are not really enough. And what I mean with that is, even though that target is there, we need to break it down and make that something tangible and actionable for the individual working with that decision at the point when we can affect those emissions. So if we talk production of a car, a few of the decisions that impact the end emissions of the car when it's rolling, those are taken 5 to 10 years ahead of when the emissions will happen. And of course, we don't have very specific data by that time. We haven't even thought of what suppliers should be there, but we still need to somehow predict what will the likely emissions be if we dimension a car in a specific way, if we say this car will be made like this, therefore it will have steel, aluminum, and thereby, if we know what the last car would be, and if we don't say something specific about a specific component, we can assume what the emissions will be unless we take other actions on it. And that is a key here, that we are working very, very hard to try to align what are the targets, how can we break them down to make them actionable, but also provide the data to the individuals that need it by the right time to ensure that they have the right business, the business for us to take the decision, that the templates are in place, that the incentive structure is aligned. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter. So, for example, we introduced our internal price on CO2 at COP26. And one key learning from that is the price is one thing, but we need to have all of the other stuff aligned with it. Otherwise, it doesn't really get the full impact of it. So that is something I take into this discussion, the importance of not only talking about the data, but also providing it to the right person within the company at the right time so they can take the actions needed.
Thank you, Jonas. Going over to you, Kristian. Based on what Anna and Jonas is saying here, what is your perspective on this? I mean, you represent the company that brings one solution when it comes to capturing and also managing data. So what do you say when we take this solution focus of this discussion?
I completely agree what has been said so far. I think you had a really good point, Anna, that the scope 3 emissions of one company is the scope 1 plus scope 2 emissions of that entire value chain. And with that perspective, it makes things a bit more actionable, right? The whole problem around managing scope 3 is, can we get the value chain to choose renewable energy for their scope 1 and scope 2? I mean, that is the biggest part of the challenge, right? That makes things a little bit more actionable. So, I mean, the way we approach it with our clients is, first of all, the biggest hurdle in terms of scope 3, or the biggest calculation error, if you will, is not having completeness of scope. So we look at all invoices, millions of invoices or transactions that are stored within the financial systems of our clients, in order to make sure that at least everything has been estimated and accounted for. And based on that hotspot analysis, you can see certain clusters, certain suppliers, certain categories that might stand out in terms of, here is where the largest emissions are. And then the next step is obviously to engage with that cluster, engage with those customers and say, okay, can we help you? And I think what you said around the incentives piece are really important. Can we help you to make sure that you switch to the right types of energy? So, and let's work together. I mean, scope 3 is all about collaboration in the end of the day, but you need to start with the data and the actionable insights to ensure completeness of scope. And just like a quick anecdote on the completeness of scope question, we see this over and over again, that when clients start to use our software and we kind of go through every single invoice, the emissions, scope 3 emissions, go up, and sometimes by 400%. So that was, for instance, the case with one of our clients, MTC, and we see that as a great thing. The emissions in scope 3 goes up because now we have finally an accurate baseline, and without that accurate baseline, we don't know who to engage in our value chain in terms of transition towards renewables and decarbonization.
And
would you like to add?
Yeah, on that note, Kristian, I agree. There's, to me, I think there are two sides to it. It is the data, but again, do we have good enough data to really start acting? Because we can't just wait for the perfect data, but we have done a lot by calculating the baseline and then start really focusing on bringing that down, because there's long-term commitments to bring down the scopes. So we have to work, for example, as I said yesterday, with fossil-free steel together with SSAB to make that happen. And we have to work together with our customers to optimize their processes by collecting a lot of data, digitalization, and then help them bring down their scope, because that goes into our scope. So really parallel work with optimizing, bringing down from those hotspots that we do know that we have already, and then work parallel to get the data as good as possible.
Very interesting. And if we stay on the topic of fossil-free steel for a moment as well, given that it's really a proud Swedish innovation in many senses, I know that one important area to discuss here is also standards.
It is.
So how do you ensure, from a fossil-free steel perspective, that it's actually fossil-free in order to work with that as a solution in your scope-free value chain?
That is a very good question, because we do not have a standard yet. We have our partnership with SSAB, where we together know what fossil-free steel is, but when that market then expands and more suppliers will bring us that, we need a standard, because as now we do not know and have a standard what is fossil-free steel. And I know you have the same issue, I think, in Volvo cars, right?
Yeah. Jonas, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, I would be happy to do so. I very much agree. The standardization of, both fossil-free or near-zero steel, I think that is a critical thing that must come in place for us to dare to act more, even more than what we're trying to do right now. And to me, that is a bigger problem than only steel. I think we can talk about both, all the other hard-to-abate areas, or even renewable energy, that we need to have the standards in place to make our supply chain act faster. Right now, we are very dependent on the data that they provide us and the energy consumption they tell us. But unless there is a third-party validation or some standardization when they're claiming something, or when they're talking about the life cycle emissions of their products or components, it is very hard for us to fully trust the data unless we dive in and double check it. And long term, that can't be something that companies like us have to do. So the need of standardization is very important, that all of us need to be able to focus what we can impact the most, but also ask others to do what they can do, and that we can trust whatever they tell us.
Very interesting. And from your perspective, Kristian, when we speak about standards, I mean, this is your core business. How do you work with the standards question? Are you trying to set the standard, or are you following the pack?
So I think there's several standards that are important here. I mean, first of all, the standards around, the emissions accounting in scope 1, 2, and 3, to make sure that that is comparable. Because in the end of the day, I mean, that is what enables financial markets to work. I mean, if I, as an investor, know that, the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions of this company is comparable to this company, then you can make very kind of, earmarked investments in terms of, okay, how can we transition? So that's the type of standards that we are working with. But then there's obviously the standards that you are talking about as well, for the specific technologies in scope 3 that needs to be implemented, whether or not it's sustainable concrete, or sustainable steel, or if it's renewable electricity. All of those things need to be standardized, so you know what you are getting, that you actually get the desired decarbonization effects that you are after. So I think it's all about standards in the end of the day. It's the standards of the accounting, it's the standards of the reduction, and so on.
Excellent. And COP27 is supposed to be the implementation COP. So let's turn the focus a bit and focus on the practical examples that you have as your companies when it comes to reducing your scope 3 emissions. So for you, Anna,
yes.
Do you have any good examples of this?
Yes.
That it is actually possible today?
Yes.
And it's not something for 10 years down in the future?
No, it's not. And we do know our big emitters, as we have calculated the baseline. And again, I'm bringing that up again and again, but we do have, it's 3 parts, I think, both the scope 3 upstreams, our suppliers, to work closely, not just with SSAB and fossil-free steel, but also gaskets are a big emitter for us, and we work together with our suppliers in that area to have recycled gaskets, for example, and really work together to innovate the new. And then on the other side, where we have the customer and the user face, we do closely work together to make digital innovation happen and get the AI in place, because it's too much data for any of us to handle. We have to have AI solutions to optimize every minute. And there we, for example, to be very specific, have thermal cameras looking at our equipment at customer sites and making service as optimized as possible, which has a huge effect on the global emissions for carbon emissions. 2.5% is what's there to get if we have the right service in place. And then the third one, we do need on long term to work on the clean tech, for example, to find the new fuels for the future, to make renewables available for everyone who needs to bring down, everyone needs to bring down their scope 1 and 2. So those are the 3 ones that we really focused on to bring down the total footprint of our own and our customers and suppliers.
Very interesting. Jonas, would you like to give us a practical example from Volvo car side as well?
Yes, I'm happy to do so. Well, starting off, if we look at the complete life cycle emissions of a car, then of course going electric is the first step, and then there we can already see that we're having a big impact by going electric. Then of course charging that renewably is a massive thing, but if we talk the ingoing materials of the car, our scope 3 emissions or our upstream emissions, they come mainly from steel, aluminum, and batteries. Those 3 make up a very big share of the total emissions of the ingoing material of the car. And from those 3, we can see a number of sort of low-hanging fruits, if we call it like that, to introduce more low-emission aluminum and ensure that we have renewable energy in the melting phase of aluminum, to go with different types of near-zero steel to ensure we reduce emissions from steel and support the development of that market, or to ensure that we develop more sustainable batteries to bring down the emissions from batteries. But to me, I want to also touch upon what I mentioned earlier, that we see a really key activity here to be able to ensure that we act early on, because we are thinking of the platform of the next car very many years ahead, and unless we take the decisions at the right time, it doesn't really matter how much I sit here and talk about the emissions of steel and aluminum, because it will still be too high emissions and too much of the materials. So we need to act much earlier than what many companies usually talk about, and what I think many companies should talk more about. Otherwise, we will still be locked into too high emissions, regardless if we manage to sort of set the right targets on renewable energy, for example. So the ability to predict emissions and steer the right activities at the right time would be the key thing here. And that is a rather recent learning from us. Of course, we've talked about steel for a while, but taking that decision at the right time, or even loudly talking to the steel market about the importance we see of steel the coming years. It's rather easy to predict that we will need rather many tons of steel, regardless of the volume we will have in 2030, to ensure that we bring down the emissions of steel by 2030. And those tons of steel are not yet there. So we need to have companies like SSAB and H2 Green Steel, etc. We need more of them, because the whole steel industry must be there. And otherwise, we might be the ones lucky to source the steel available, but that will just create a problem for the ones that didn't get the right steel. So we need all of them to shape up.
Thank you, Jonas. I see that Anna wants that.
That I just agree with Jonas. It's the same for us. Our products, they have a lifespan of over 30 years sometimes. So what we do in R&D now really has a long-term effect. And that's a very important part, to really think what's going to happen, because what we do now will be there 2050. And that's why we need to both work on the circularity part as well, to bring down our scopes, to design for circularity all from the start. And we do have examples where we have a heat exchanger, for example, where we actually can refit, redesign, and reuse, and also recycle, because we've thought about that from the start, that is, we are able to recycle 100% of that metal, which is also a very important part of making this happen, the transformation.
Thank you, Anna. As a summary to this discussion, I think it would be very interesting to hear the thoughts from all of you 3 when it comes to the key takeaways for visitors and delegates here at COP27. What are the key takeaways, Kristian, within the Scope 3 discussion?
My key takeaway would be that supply chains and value chains are not built over a day. I mean, you guys have been in the business for several decades, and building that value chain has taken several decades. And now all of a sudden, you need to decarbonize it, in a few decades, ideally as fast as possible. So that requires a lot of time, energy, and investment. So my recommendation would be, you need the actionable insights and the data in order to get the most bang for the buck for that investment and focus on the lowest hanging fruits first.
Thank you, Kristian. Jonas, should we go over to you?
Yes, I agree with that. And we talked about standardization. To me, that is a critical thing here, that we need to have a standardized set of data to be able for us to act on. But then I will also want to chip in the importance of some sort of global price on CO2. Of course, all of us can set an internal carbon price, but in the end of the day, we need to increase the cost of emitting CO2. And thereby it would help a lot if more countries and more companies start setting that price on CO2 as well.
Thank you, Jonas. And finally, Anna.
Yes, I think what we talked about here is so important, that we drive for transparency with the data, making it fair and making it global, because we are global companies that work on a global level. The climate is not a local issue. And I think it's a very important part also to start acting with good enough data, not wait for the perfect ones, and engage your entire organization, because scopes go into everything you do. And you have to have the engagement commitment on each and every level in your organization to make this happen. It's not a corporate centralized topic, it's everywhere. So leadership, take leadership and engage everyone. I think that's a very important key to this.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think we can conclude that the discussion around Scope 3 emission is complex, but there are actually things happening. So can we please get a round of applause for our speakers? And with that, I would like to round off this session and thank our visitors online as well. Don't remember to tune in to the continuous sessions during this day, but also the rest of the 2 weeks here at COP27. Thank you so much.